Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. This video, we're going to take a look at a review of the molds that I used for my recent modular board set. I was asking my patrons what they'd like to see for a review, and this was one of the requests, so I moved it up in the queue, and I thought I'd also take a little bit more time to look at the molds themselves in addition to the actual technique on how to use them. Just for a backstory, my wife and I think I mentioned this in another video, my wife and I went to a local railroad show, and while I don't do railroad, right, railroad and wargame terrain are very closely linked, and it's always a good idea to go down there just to check out maybe new tools, maybe new technique, new products. A lot of times I'll see trees. That's where I saw sill floor tufts the first time, and I was like, what are these? I have to have these. So every time I go, and we don't go every year, I frequently see something that catches my eye. And we had been walking through the whole event. It's like a multi-building event here in Massachusetts, and hadn't really found anything that caught my eye. I saw a couple rocks that were done that I thought maybe I could make a mold from, but not quite committed. And then we were walking almost at the end of the day out one of the back buildings, and there was this gentleman giving a demonstration. And he was showing how he casts into his rock molds that he made, and how it's sort of a revolutionary, he didn't use the term revolutionary, but, you know, a very advantageous way of building large rock faces that are lightweight, flexible, well, not flexible when they're cured, but flexible in their use, shapeable, all this stuff. And I was like picking my jaw up off the floor, sat down, watched the very last 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes of his demonstration, but that was enough for me to get the sense of what was going on. And then afterwards, I went right over there and started grilling him about how he's painting them and all of that. So I picked up a mold. Since then, I've picked up a couple more, and I have to say I've really been enjoying this technique for making rocks. It has a lot of advantages, and it's, I think, superior to anything that I've tried before. So that's the intro, that's the backstory, and I'll bring you over to the bench. We'll take a look at these molds in a little bit more detail, and I'll tell you how they're used. So since this is quite a large mold, I'm going to step in front of the camera a little bit so we can I can manipulate it a little bit easier. And I will show you a close-up of it in just a couple minutes. The basic premise here is that Mr. Bragdon has, he's a geologist, I think, by original trade. He has gone around the country and made latex molds from actual rock faces. The rock molds vary quite a bit in size. This is not the largest, I don't believe, that he has, but it is one of the larger. You can get smaller ones as well. This is, I don't know, what is this, 11 by 7? Look at that, 11 by 7. Booyah, huh? That's not too bad. Anyway, so there's a variety of textures, there's a variety of sizes. I think there are over 50 different molds there, all representing different kinds of rock faces. The basic procedure for how to use the mold is to apply a release agent to it. Now, he recommends using Vaseline, but trying to rub Vaseline into a thin layer into all of this detail is crazy. I don't know how people do it. So I've been spraying it with my Smooth-On mold release. I'm using, I don't know, Man Ease Release 200, I think, which is actually not a Smooth-On product, but they sell it. And after you apply your release agent to it, you'll notice here, next step is to spray paint it with your base color. Now, he recommends white as the base color, and if you're going to follow his painting instructions, which require gesso, then white is a great idea, because covering darker colors with gesso is a trick. I mean, obviously, depending on how you wanted to paint it, you could prime it gray, you could prime it black. I haven't always had white, so I have been using gray quite a bit because I just ran out of white. So there's that. Release, spray paint. Now, I work really hard to hit all of these little undersides, so spray painting it, take your time, right? Light dustings, don't get crazy on it. Then, what you're going to do is you're going to mix a resin and pour the resin into this, a small amount, rub it in, wear a glove. I'm not a big personal safety person, you know, whatever, I'll take my own risks, but when you're going to rub in resin, it's not really about safety. It's not that caustic or dangerous, but your hand will be a mess after that. So rub that all in. You can see a little bit here that didn't quite come out when I took out the mold, and you can see how there is a little that's actually not too bad. So you can see a little of that resin outer layer. Put the resin in, thin layer, let that start to harden, then pour an expanding foam into the mold, let that harden, then demold it. And what you end up with is a sheet of rock that looks like this. The rock, right, so this is what it looks like on the back. You can see some of the resin is still exposed. It's a trick kind of to try to get as even a coating as you can. You got to manipulate the mold and turn it all around and keep it from spilling out, and you know, it takes a little practice. But when you put the foam in, that gives it a little bit more rigidity, and you have now the ability to mount it onto something and the ability then to paint it and have a really nice texture, right? How awesome is that? That's 2 feet by 1 foot single rock facing. You could do big projects with this. But the best part of this is that when you want to use a section, you can cut it out, right? I use my Dremel with a plastic blade, you know, whatever, cut those out. And then, because the thickness of this is so thin, you can then heat this with a heat gun. It'll soften the plastic, it'll soften the foam, and then you can bend it into whatever shape you want. That's the huge advantage, is you're not restricted to plates of stone like you are with plaster, and you're putting them on and trying to stitch them all together. With this cut, I know it's all stitched together, although, to be fair, I do have to stitch sometimes, and you know, that's got its own trick and management to it to get a good effect, but it is possible. So that is the basic process, and that is what the output from your mold should look like. Once you're done, what he recommends doing, his technique, which I am still working on, I'll be trying a new version of this painting technique in my next go, is to base coat it with gesso. So instead of getting a painting technique like with plaster, where the paint seeps into the pores, we're actually creating an impermeable shell so the paint cannot wick into the substrate, although it's not going to wick into this, but it binds the paint really well to the surface. And then he uses black tempera powder and rubs that in to the surface and wipes it off to give the shading, and then it washes over the top of that to create your color and your contrast. So very different painting technique. He explains it a little bit on the website. You might want to check it out, and keep an eye on my rocks in the near future to see how my quality and coloring changes as I learn how to do this new process more myself. So before we leave this bench, I do want to talk about the quality of these molds, and I think to do that, we're going to want to come up just a little bit closer on it. So when I first started taking a look at these molds, I actually was freaked out because there are tons of imperfections in them. So for instance, let's see, well, I mean, okay, this is Mr. Picky here, but you can see in here these little bubbles. These were bubbles when the mold was made, and these were little air pockets. You can see areas where the mold did not actually cover, or there's an internal bubble here. You can see, there's just numerous lots of these spots all over. And in fact, when I first got the mold home, I was like, well, I'm going to buy it anyway, because my God, it's 2 feet of mold. That's awesome. And it was $50. Good value. I was thinking I was actually going to cast the whole piece in plaster, go back over it, see defects here, go back over it, and then fix all the holes, and then make a new mold from it. More here. That's crazy, but I would have done it. But I decided to go with this first, and what I found is that the holes that it makes, oh, well, you know what? I've got a cast here. Let's see if we can find a few of these imperfections. Okay, I think we're going to be able to keep most of this in focus here, huh? I think so. All right. So what kinds of problems are you going to see in your casts? You're going to see a little bubble like this sticking out. You're going to see some of those in here, but those kind of look like rocks, so that's all right. There's a bubble there. There's a bubble here. And occasionally you'll actually have holes where tiny, here we go, tiny pit right here. All right, so this is not a perfect surface in any way, shape, or form. These are numerous and they're scattered about. But when you coat, here's another one right there, when you coat this with gesso, it will fill quite a few of those voids, and it really ties it all back together. And I've been surprised at how effective it fixes a lot of the problems in the mold, in the cast, I should say, at this stage. So I would give these molds an A++ if they were clean. But I suspect a lot of the problem is that when you are painting latex, so he goes out, right, this is, you can tell, right, there's a couple layers of latex on this. When you go, now this is a reproduction of his original, but you, excuse me, you find a rock, right, and then you paint latex over it, but where the rock has these voids, okay, it might be tricky to get that latex in there, and you won't know that until you peel it off, and it's a rather lengthy process to do something like this. So I suspect that, you know, a lot of these imperfections are from the initial coating of the rock, because as you can see, this has a very, you know, aggressive texture, you know, undercuts and whatnot. So you know, it's likely that you're going to yield bubbles and some problems with the mold. But one last thought on this before we leave is that latex, if you have not cast with latex before, and I have not used a latex mold, they're quite durable. That's one thing that latex has that is often underappreciated, is it's got a very good tear resistance, very, very good actually, and it seems to be holding up pretty well to resin casting. I've done probably maybe 6 casts into it so far, because 6 casts, well, they go a long way. But it's starting, I think, to do what, let's see here, wait a minute, let's see if I can bring it into the frame without having to move the camera. Well, I don't know if you're going to be able to tell. But here, it's starting to bow a little bit, and one of the things that happens with a silicone rubber, at least from my experience, is that somehow it begins to absorb compounds or changes its consistency at the surface, and that causes a little bit of an expansion. And so what you end up finding is that your mold will look like this when you first start using it, and then after time, it starts to stretch and it starts to get kind of bowed out, and that is this surface expanding, right? And then it just kind of does that. And it can become a problem if you're trying to fit it into a mother mold, right, that has a fixed dimension. And we're not going to talk about silicone casting at this point, but I just wanted to make that comparison. If you've worked with silicones and you haven't worked with latex, I would say they're fairly comparable in a lot of ways for casting with resins. But I don't know how self-releasing latex is, so I'm very careful to give very good coverage, you know, and making sure I'm very confident that I have gotten into all of these voids, paint and release agent, to try to prevent the resin from making any contact with the actual surface of the rubber. So that gives you a look at the molds themselves, and we'll wrap it up, and I'll talk a little bit more about the website. So that gives you a look at the Bragdon Enterprises mold. I don't know if I mentioned that in the intro. Bragdon Enterprises. Of course, I'll probably have a link down here in the bottom. But it's a site worth visiting, I think. It's a crazy old site that is terribly disorganized. Like, finding things on it is not as easy as a website should be in 2014. Oh my God, I'm already in next year. This is what it's like to work in the basement. But it's worth a look, and he has a step-by-step procedure that shows some pictures and describes how he paints them, how he casts into them, and then of course there's a large list of molds there with the worst pictures of the rocks they make possible. I think the only way you could make them worse is to shoot them in black and white and then add a blur overlay on them. They're really bad. But they kind of give you an idea, and once you have one in your hands or you've used one, you can start to judge a little bit. Of course, some of them don't have any pictures at all. It's a crazy sight, but it's a genius product. So, in any case, hopefully you found something here helpful, a little bit interesting. Questions and comments, always welcome down below. Try to answer them all. And always looking for questions for the Q&A. And stay tuned. Got more videos coming up. So hopefully you'll return and you'll see me again in another TerranScapes video. Three, 2, 1. So this mold is pretty big, so I'm actually going to step a little in front of the canyer. 3, 2, 1.